Imagine waking up tomorrow to discover that death is not the end, but merely a doorway to realms of unimaginable beauty or unspeakable horror. Picture scientists announcing they have photographed heaven and hell, documented souls crossing over, and proven beyond doubt that every choice you make echoes through eternity. What would you do if you knew with absolute certainty that your afterlife destination was real, measurable, and waiting? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. Tonight, we step into a world where faith becomes fact, where ancient promises are scientifically proven, and where humanity must face the most terrifying truth of all, that everything the prophets warned us about was real. Chapter 1. The Ancient Promise. Long before science could peer into the mysteries of existence, ancient voices spoke of two destinations that awaited every human soul. In the beginning, when Adam and Eve walked with God in perfect harmony, they knew nothing of death or what lay beyond it. Paradise was their present reality, not a distant hope. But then came the fall, the first sin, and with it, the first glimpse of humanity's eternal dilemma. As God spoke of consequences that would stretch beyond earthly life, He painted pictures of realms that would either reward or punish the choices made in flesh and blood. The ancient Mesopotamians carved their fears into stone tablets, describing dark underworlds where the wicked suffered endlessly. The Egyptians built pyramids to ensure safe passage to blessed afterlife kingdoms. But it was the Hebrew prophets who first detailed these eternal destinations with stunning clarity. Jesus Christ walked among humanity, speaking with authority about His Father's house with many mansions, about streets of gold and gates of pearl. Yet He also warned of a place where the fire is not quenched and the worm does not die. His words were not metaphors to those who heard them, but literal descriptions of real locations. The Apostle Paul claimed to be caught up to the third heaven, seeing things too wonderful for human language. John the Revelator penned visions of crystal seas, angelic choruses, and a lake of fire where the devil himself would be tormented forever. These were not dreams or symbols, but testimonies from men who claimed to have seen eternity with their own eyes. For 2,000 years, billions have lived and died believing these ancient promises. They built their lives around hope of heaven and fear of hell. They sacrificed earthly pleasures for eternal rewards. They chose martyrdom over denial, all based on faith alone, never knowing if their beliefs would prove true until the moment of their final breath. Chapter 2. The Veil Between Worlds. Throughout history, tantalizing glimpses have pierced the veil between life and death. Near-death experiences told of bright tunnels and beings of light. Saints reported visions of heavenly splendor. Mystics claimed direct communication with divine realms. But these testimonies always carried the weight of uncertainty. Skeptics dismissed them as hallucinations, wishful thinking, or religious delusion. Science demanded proof that faith could never provide. The boundary between this world and the next remained stubbornly impenetrable to human investigation. Ezekiel described wheels within wheels and creatures with 4 faces surrounding God's throne. Paul spoke of being caught up to paradise, where he heard inexpressible words. Catherine of Siena claimed to visit purgatory and witness souls in various states of purification. Fatima's children reported conversations with the Virgin Mary about heaven and hell. Yet for every testimony, doubt lingered. If these realms truly existed, why couldn't science detect them? Why didn't God simply prove their reality once and for all? The faithful lived with hope, while skeptics demanded evidence that never came. The closest humanity came to proof were fleeting moments at death's door. Patients flatlining on operating tables returned with stories of leaving their bodies, traveling through tunnels of light, meeting deceased relatives, and experiencing love beyond human comprehension. Others reported horrifying descents into dark realms of torment and despair. But medical science explained these away as brain chemistry, oxygen deprivation, or psychological coping mechanisms. The veil remained intact, separating the world of the living from whatever lay beyond. Faith was required for belief, and belief was all anyone had. Until now. Chapter 3. The discovery that changed everything. Dr. Sarah Chen never intended to prove the existence of heaven and hell. The quantum physicist was simply trying to understand consciousness at the moment of death, using advanced particle accelerators to study what happened to human awareness when brain activity ceased. It was 3:47 a.m. on October 15th when her instruments detected something impossible. As patient monitoring equipment registered complete brain death, her quantum sensors recorded massive energy displacement occurring in dimensional frequencies previously unknown to science. The readings showed conscious energy not disappearing, but transitioning to coordinates that existed outside normal space-time. Even more shocking, the energy signatures were traveling to one of two distinct dimensional locations, depending on variables that seemed to correlate with the patient's moral and spiritual history. Within hours, the laboratory was sealed by government officials. Within days, the experiment was replicated in secure facilities across 6 countries. The results were identical and undeniable. Human consciousness continued after death, traveling to measurable locations in parallel dimensional space. Dr. Chen's breakthrough came from combining quantum field theory with near-death experience research. She discovered that consciousness operated on quantum frequencies that remained stable even after physical brain death. More importantly, she found these frequencies followed specific pathways that led to 2 primary destinations. The scientific community erupted in chaos. Peer review processes were abandoned as researchers raced to confirm or debunk findings that threatened to overturn centuries of materialist assumptions. Religious leaders held emergency conferences. Government officials classified information while frantically trying to understand the implications. But the truth could not be contained. Independent laboratories around the world began detecting the same dimensional gateways, the same conscious energy patterns, the same 2 ultimate destinations for every human soul. Chapter 4. The Proof. No one could deny. Within 6 months, the evidence became overwhelming. Advanced quantum cameras captured images of realms beyond human imagination. Spectral analysis confirmed the presence of conscious beings existing in pure energy form. Communication protocols were established with departed souls who could describe their experiences in detail. The first photographs showed landscapes of impossible beauty, cities of living light, crystalline waters that sang with harmony, beings of radiant energy moving in perfect joy. The scientific instruments measuring these realms registered frequencies of pure love, peace, and overwhelming happiness that had no earthly equivalent. But the cameras also captured realms of unspeakable horror, regions of consuming darkness, lakes of liquid fire, beings twisted by their own choices into forms of living torment. The instruments measuring these areas registered frequencies of despair, rage, and suffering so intense that researchers required psychological counseling after extended exposure. Direct communication was established when Dr. Chen's team discovered that quantum entanglement allowed two-way information transfer with conscious entities in the afterlife dimensions. The conversations that followed shattered every remaining doubt about life after death. Departed souls described their transition experiences with scientific precision. Those in the positive realm spoke of arriving at judgment seats, where every deed was reviewed with perfect justice and mercy. They described being welcomed by beings of light and experiencing joy that made earthly happiness seem like shadows. Those in the negative realm spoke of the moment they realized their choices had led them to separation from all good. They described the weight of perfect justice without mercy, the company of others who had chosen selfishness over love, and the terrible awareness that they had chosen their destination through their own free will. Medical science verified that communication was occurring with the same individuals who had died in monitored conditions. Personality traits, memories, and specific knowledge remained intact, proving consciousness survival beyond physical death. Chapter 5. When faith became fact. The psychological impact on humanity was immediate and devastating. Emergency hotlines were overwhelmed with calls from people experiencing existential crises. Some celebrated that their faith had been vindicated. Others panicked as they faced the reality of eternal accountability. Religious conversion rates exploded as people desperately sought the correct path to positive afterlife outcomes. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples overflowed with seekers who could no longer afford to be uncertain about their eternal destiny. Suicide rates initially skyrocketed as some chose to cut to the chase and face judgment immediately rather than risk further moral failure. Others committed suicide in despair, believing they were already destined for negative outcomes. Crisis intervention teams worked around the clock to prevent self-harm. Stock markets crashed as people abandoned material pursuits in favor of spiritual preparation. Luxury industries collapsed overnight when consumers realized earthly pleasures had no eternal value. Charitable giving increased by thousands of percent as people desperately sought to improve their moral standing. Marriage and family relationships transformed as couples faced the reality that their union might extend beyond death. Some relationships grew stronger through shared spiritual purpose. Others crumbled under the pressure of eternal accountability. Criminal activity dropped to near zero in most developed nations as potential lawbreakers faced certain knowledge of cosmic justice. Prison systems became rehabilitation centers focused on preparing inmates for positive afterlife transitions. The death penalty was abolished globally as execution became tantamount to forced judgment. Children born after the discovery grew up with certainty about eternal consequences. Educational systems were revolutionized to focus on moral development rather than material success. A new generation emerged that made life choices based on eternal rather than temporal considerations. Chapter 6. The Great Religious Convergence. The world's major religions faced their greatest crisis and opportunity in history. Suddenly, core doctrines about afterlife destinations required scientific verification rather than faith alone. Some religious teachings were confirmed with stunning accuracy, while others required dramatic reinterpretation. Christianity experienced massive upheaval as various denominations discovered which interpretations aligned with observable reality. Catholics found validation for purgatory concepts when scientists documented intermediate purification realms. Protestant emphasis on grace alone was confirmed, as some departed souls reported salvation despite imperfect lives. However, denominational differences that had divided Christianity for centuries became irrelevant in the face of verified eternal truth. Methodists, Baptists, Lutherans, and Pentecostals found themselves united by shared evidence rather than divided by theological interpretation. Islam experienced perhaps the most dramatic confirmation as Quranic descriptions of paradise and hell matched scientific observations with remarkable precision. The multiple levels of Jannah described in Islamic texts corresponded exactly to documented heavenly realms. Similarly, the various levels of Jahannam aligned with observed regions of negative afterlife experience. This led to massive conversion movements as people compared religious texts with scientific findings. The Quran's detailed afterlife geography, previously accepted only by faith, now served as an accurate guidebook to scientifically verified realms. Judaism grappled with concepts of Olam Haba, the world to come, being confirmed while traditional views of Sheol required re-examination. Orthodox, conservative, and Reform communities found common ground in verified afterlife reality, leading to unprecedented Jewish unity. Hinduism experienced validation of ancient concepts as the multiple lokas worlds described in Vedic texts were scientifically documented. The complex karma system governing reincarnation and spiritual progression received mathematical confirmation through soul-tracking technology. Chapter 7: The Theological Revolution. Seminary schools worldwide faced complete curriculum overhaul as theological speculation became scientific fact. Professors who had spent careers interpreting ancient texts now found themselves teaching verified reality rather than theoretical possibilities. The field of apologetics virtually disappeared as religious defenders no longer needed to argue for their faith's validity. Instead, new disciplines emerged combining theology with quantum physics, consciousness research, and dimensional studies. Religious leaders transitioned from faith-based teachers to evidence-based guides. Pastors, priests, rabbis, and imams found their roles shifting from inspiring belief to helping people navigate proven eternal realities. Sermons changed from encouragement to practical instruction for afterlife preparation. Interfaith dialogue took on new urgency as religious communities sought to understand which practices led to positive afterlife outcomes. Ancient rivalries dissolved as shared evidence unified humanity's spiritual quest. New religious movements emerged that combined scientific findings with traditional spiritual practices. These evidential faith communities attracted millions seeking to optimize their afterlife destination through proven methods rather than traditional hope. The Vatican opened secret archives to allow scientific comparison of hidden texts with verified afterlife observations. Ancient manuscripts describing heavenly realms were studied for accuracy against quantum measurements. Some proved remarkably precise, while others were revealed as human speculation. Missionary work transformed from conversion-focused to education-focused as religious communities shared practical knowledge about afterlife preparation. Competition between faiths decreased, while cooperation in spiritual development increased. Chapter 8: Society's Moral Awakening. Humanity experienced the most dramatic moral transformation in recorded history. Crime statistics plummeted as potential criminals faced certain knowledge of eternal consequences for their actions. Murder, theft, and violence became virtually extinct in developed nations. Justice systems required complete restructuring as traditional deterrents became unnecessary. Courts focused on rehabilitation and restitution rather than punishment. Prisons transformed into spiritual development centers, helping offenders prepare for positive afterlife transitions. Economic inequality decreased dramatically as wealthy individuals donated vast fortunes to avoid negative afterlife consequences. Corporate executives voluntarily reduced their salaries while increasing worker benefits. The concept of extreme wealth accumulation became morally unthinkable. Marriage and sexual relationships transformed as people recognized eternal implications of their choices. Divorce rates initially spiked as couples reassessed their commitments, then dropped to historic lows as partners united in shared spiritual goals. Parenting methods revolutionized as parents took responsibility for their children's eternal preparation. Education shifted from academic achievement to character development. Children grew up with clear moral frameworks based on verified consequences. Mental health improved dramatically as people found clear meaning and purpose in life. Depression rates dropped as individuals understood their lives had eternal significance. Anxiety initially increased as people faced cosmic accountability, then decreased as they learned to live with moral certainty. Environmental stewardship became a moral imperative as people recognized their responsibility for creation care. Pollution virtually ended as individuals and corporations faced eternal consequences for environmental destruction. Chapter 9. The Economics of Eternity. Global economic systems collapsed and rebuilt around eternal rather than temporal values. Traditional capitalism became obsolete as profit maximization conflicted with spiritual development requirements. Stock markets became irrelevant as investors abandoned material gains for spiritual investments. Companies that contributed to positive afterlife outcomes thrived, while those promoting vice or exploitation disappeared. New currencies emerged based on verified karma points and spiritual merit. People traded acts of kindness and moral development rather than material goods. Economic success was redefined as afterlife preparation progress. Luxury industries vanished overnight as consumers realized material possessions had no eternal value. Fashion, jewelry, and entertainment companies either transformed to serve spiritual purposes or ceased operations. Charitable organizations became the new economic powerhouses as people desperately sought opportunities to improve their eternal standing. Giving became the primary economic activity as individuals competed to demonstrate love and compassion. Labor systems transformed as people chose careers based on spiritual benefit rather than financial gain. Healthcare, education, and social services experienced massive growth, while industries promoting vice declined. International trade focused on necessities and items supporting spiritual development. Weapons manufacturing ended as nations recognized warfare's eternal consequences. Resources were redirected toward human flourishing and environmental restoration. Banking systems restructured around spiritual investment principles. Interest-based lending was abandoned as usury carried eternal consequences. New financial models emerged supporting community development and spiritual growth. Chapter 10. Nations under Divine Judgment. World governments faced unprecedented pressure to align policies with verified eternal principles. Citizens demanded leaders who could guarantee not just earthly security, but eternal salvation. The United Nations held emergency sessions to establish international laws based on scientifically proven divine standards. Human rights expanded to include spiritual development rights. National sovereignty was challenged when domestic policies conflicted with eternal principles. Nuclear weapons were voluntarily destroyed as nations recognized warfare's catastrophic spiritual consequences. Military budgets were redirected toward humanitarian aid and spiritual education programs. Corrupt governments fell as populations demanded leaders with verified positive afterlife destinations. Democratic elections became spiritual assessments as candidates' moral standing determined their political viability. International cooperation increased dramatically as nations recognized shared eternal destiny. Borders became less relevant as spiritual community transcended national identity. Legal systems integrated eternal consequences into judicial proceedings. Laws were rewritten to reflect scientifically verified moral standards. Crime prevention focused on spiritual education rather than deterrent punishment. Environmental policies became moral imperatives as nations recognized stewardship responsibilities. Climate change action accelerated as leaders faced personal eternal consequences for environmental neglect. Economic policies prioritized spiritual development over material prosperity. Social welfare systems expanded to ensure all citizens could focus on afterlife preparation without material anxiety. Chapter 11: The Forbidden Texts Revealed. Scientific verification of afterlife realms cast new light on ancient texts previously dismissed or suppressed by mainstream religions. The Book of Enoch, banned from biblical canon, contained descriptions of heavenly hierarchies and hellish regions that matched quantum observations with startling accuracy. Gnostic Gospels, hidden for centuries, revealed detailed knowledge of afterlife geography that proved remarkably precise. The Gospel of Thomas contained sayings of Jesus about eternal realms that corresponded exactly to documented observations. Dead Sea Scrolls provided additional verification as ancient descriptions aligned with modern measurements. Previously mysterious passages suddenly made sense when compared with scientific data about dimensional transitions. The Vatican opened secret archives containing suppressed texts that described afterlife experiences with documentary precision. Church officials had hidden these writings to maintain doctrinal control, but scientific verification demanded their release. Apocryphal books like 2 Enoch and the Testament of Abraham contained detailed descriptions of heavenly tours that matched photographic evidence from quantum cameras. Ancient visionaries had apparently witnessed the same realms now confirmed by science. Buddhist texts describing various bardo states during death transitions proved accurate when compared with observed consciousness transfer processes. Tibetan descriptions of intermediate realms corresponded to documented way stations between dimensions. Hindu Puranas contained elaborate descriptions of multiple heavens and hells that aligned with scientific observations. Ancient Sanskrit texts served as accurate guidebooks to verified afterlife destinations. These forbidden texts became new scriptural authorities as their accuracy exceeded traditional religious writings. Seminary schools added previously banned books to required reading lists. Chapter 12: The Islamic Revelation. Islamic texts experienced perhaps the most dramatic scientific vindication as Quranic descriptions of paradise and hell proved extraordinarily accurate. The multiple levels of Jannah described in Islamic tradition corresponded exactly to documented heavenly realms. Quranic details about paradise, rivers of honey and milk, trees bearing fruit without seasons, companions of pure beauty, and dwellings of precious stones, matched photographic evidence from quantum observations. Even specific measurements of heavenly architecture aligned with scientific data. Similarly, Islamic descriptions of hell's various levels, from Jahim to Hawiyah, corresponded precisely to observed regions of negative afterlife experience. The Quran's warnings about fire that neither dies nor gives light matched scientific measurements of dimensional punishment zones. Hadith collections containing Prophet Muhammad's detailed afterlife descriptions proved remarkably accurate. Stories of the Prophet's night journey through various heavenly levels aligned perfectly with documented observations of dimensional hierarchies. This scientific validation led to massive conversion movements as people compared religious accuracy. Islamic universities became centers for afterlife research as scholars combined traditional knowledge with quantum science. The 5 daily prayers took on new urgency as Muslims realized they were communicating with scientifically verified divine presence. Pilgrimage to Mecca experienced unprecedented demand as spiritual practices gained empirical validation. Islamic banking principles were globally adopted as interest-based systems carried verified eternal consequences. Sharia law concepts were re-examined through scientific afterlife research. Interfaith relationships shifted as Islamic afterlife descriptions proved most accurate to scientific observations, leading to theological discussions about salvation paths in other religions. Chapter 13: The Hindu Cosmic Truth. Hinduism experienced stunning validation as ancient Vedic cosmology aligned perfectly with scientific observations. The 14 lokas, worlds, described in Hindu texts were photographically documented by quantum cameras, revealing multiple dimensional layers of existence. The complex karma system governing spiritual progression received mathematical confirmation through soul-tracking technology. Scientists could measure karmic accumulation and observe its effect on afterlife destination with precise accuracy. Reincarnation cycles were observed in real time as consciousness entities transitioned between dimensional realms before returning to physical incarnation. The ancient concept of samsara became scientifically measurable. Caste system concepts gained controversial validation as spiritual energy measurements showed correlation between moral development and social position. This created intense debate about hereditary spiritual status versus individual choice. Hindu concepts of moksha, liberation, were confirmed as scientists observed consciousness entities achieving states beyond normal afterlife destinations. Advanced souls were documented transcending dimensional limitations entirely. Vedic texts became scientific manuals as ancient descriptions provided accurate guidance for dimensional navigation. Sanskrit terms for various spiritual states gained scientific terminology adoption. Yoga and meditation practices showed measurable effects on afterlife destination probability. Hindu spiritual disciplines were scientifically validated as effective consciousness development methods. The concept of avatar, divine incarnation, gained new understanding as scientists observed higher dimensional beings temporarily manifesting in lower realms for specific purposes. Chapter 14: The Buddhist Enlightenment. Buddhist teachings about consciousness and suffering gained remarkable scientific credibility as afterlife observations confirmed ancient wisdom about the nature of existence and liberation. The 6 realms of samsara were scientifically mapped, revealing dimensional locations corresponding to God realm, human realm, animal realm, hungry ghost realm, hell realm, and asura realm, described in Buddhist cosmology. Meditation practices showed measurable effects on afterlife trajectory as scientists observed consciousness purification through mindfulness disciplines. Buddhist monks became valuable guides for scientific afterlife exploration. The concept of karma received precise mathematical validation as cause and effect relationships were traced across dimensional boundaries. Actions in physical realm created measurable changes in consciousness frequency. Nirvana was confirmed as an achievable state, as scientists observed consciousness entities transcending normal dimensional limitations. The Buddhist goal of liberation from suffering became a scientifically measurable objective. The Four Noble Truths gained empirical support as suffering's causes and cessation were observed in afterlife realms. Buddhist psychology proved accurate in describing consciousness behavior across dimensions. Compassion practices showed quantifiable effects on spiritual development. The Bodhisattva ideal of helping all beings achieve liberation gained scientific validation as altruism improved afterlife outcomes. The Dalai Lama led international committees for ethical afterlife research, combining ancient wisdom with modern scientific methods to understand consciousness development across dimensional boundaries. Chapter 15: The Battle for Souls. Religious competition intensified dramatically as stakes became eternally high. Each faith claimed their path was the only valid route to positive afterlife outcomes, leading to unprecedented evangelistic efforts and, unfortunately, violent conflicts. Christian denominations competed aggressively for converts, as scientific evidence seemed to validate specific interpretations over others. Evangelical movements exploded as urgency replaced patience in salvation efforts. Islamic dawah, invitation, campaigns reached unprecedented scales as Quranic accuracy attracted millions seeking the most reliable afterlife guidance. Conversion rates to Islam accelerated dramatically. Jewish communities experienced internal debates about afterlife concepts while maintaining strong identity in face of proselytizing pressure from other faiths claiming superior afterlife knowledge. Hindu and Buddhist communities emphasized their traditions' ancient wisdom about consciousness development while welcoming scientific validation of reincarnation and karma concepts. Unfortunately, religious violence erupted in several regions as extremist groups used afterlife certainty to justify aggressive conversion tactics. Some declared holy wars to save souls from incorrect paths to negative afterlife outcomes. Governments intervened to prevent religious conflicts, while scientists worked desperately to determine if multiple valid paths existed, or if only one religion held complete truth about afterlife navigation. Interfaith dialogue became urgent necessity as humanity sought to understand spiritual unity versus religious exclusivity in light of verified eternal consequences. Peace efforts focused on identifying common spiritual principles transcending individual traditions. Chapter 16: The Technology of Salvation. Silicon Valley pivoted entirely towards salvation technology as entrepreneurs sought to monetize and optimize afterlife preparation. Artificial intelligence systems calculated optimal moral choices for heavenly admission based on observed patterns. Smartphone applications tracked daily karma accumulation, providing real-time feedback on actions' eternal consequences. Users received notifications about missed opportunities for spiritual advancement and warnings about behaviors leading toward negative outcomes. Virtual reality systems created immersive training programs for afterlife preparation. Users practiced moral decision-making in simulated scenarios, while AI evaluated their choices' eternal implications. Biotechnology companies researched methods for enhancing soul purity through genetic modification and pharmaceutical intervention. Some claim to develop drugs that increased compassion and reduced selfish impulses. Corporations attempted to create subscription services for salvation, offering premium spiritual guidance and afterlife preparation courses. Soul care became a multi-billion-dollar industry virtually overnight. Wearable devices monitored biometric indicators of spiritual development. Heart rate variability, brainwave patterns, and stress hormones were analyzed to assess progress toward positive afterlife outcomes. Dating applications integrated afterlife compatibility matching, pairing individuals based on shared spiritual trajectory rather than physical attraction or common interests. Social media platforms added karma tracking features, allowing users to monitor their digital behavior's eternal consequences while gamifying moral development through achievement systems and leaderboards. Chapter 17: The Political Transformation. Democratic systems worldwide transformed as citizens demanded leaders who could guarantee eternal security rather than temporary earthly benefits. Traditional political platforms became irrelevant compared to candidates' afterlife preparation credentials. Presidential campaigns required proof of positive afterlife trajectory as voters refused to elect leaders whose eternal destination remained uncertain. Character assessment replaced policy positions as primary qualification criteria. Religious leaders entered politics en masse as their spiritual authority gained practical governance value. Pastors, priests, rabbis, and imams found themselves elected to offices requiring afterlife guidance expertise. New political parties formed around afterlife preparation platforms. The Eternal Security Party attracted millions seeking government focused on spiritual development rather than economic growth. International relations transformed as nations evaluated each other based on collective spiritual standing rather than military or economic power. Diplomatic immunity was extended to spiritually advanced leaders regardless of national origin. Judicial systems integrated afterlife consequences into legal proceedings. Judges considered eternal implications when determining sentences, focusing on spiritual rehabilitation rather than temporal punishment. Legislative bodies worldwide rewrote laws to align with scientifically verified divine standards. Constitutional conventions were called to integrate eternal principles into foundational governing documents. Voting systems evolved to consider candidates' measured spiritual development alongside traditional qualifications, creating new forms of theocratic democracy, combining religious authority with democratic participation. Chapter 18: The Generation That Knows. Children born after the discovery grew up with absolute certainty about eternal consequences, creating humanity's most moral, yet potentially most anxious generation in history. Educational systems completely restructured around afterlife preparation rather than career development. Mathematics taught charity calculations, while literature focused on moral development stories and spiritual growth narratives. Playground behaviors transformed as children understood their interactions carried eternal weight. Bullying virtually disappeared while sharing and cooperation became instinctive responses to social situations. However, childhood anxiety increased dramatically as young minds struggled with cosmic accountability concepts. Child psychology adapted to address spiritual performance pressure and eternal judgment fears. Teenage years became intensely spiritual as adolescents faced approaching adulthood with full knowledge of life choices' eternal implications. Dating, career selection, and college decisions were evaluated through afterlife preparation criteria. Parenting methods revolutionized as mothers and fathers took direct responsibility for their children's eternal preparation. Family dynamics centered around spiritual development rather than academic or financial success. Youth suicide rates initially spiked as teenagers felt overwhelmed by eternal accountability, then decreased as spiritual counseling helped young people navigate cosmic responsibility with hope and purpose. Career counseling focused exclusively on professions supporting positive afterlife outcomes. Traditional ambitions like wealth accumulation or fame became culturally unacceptable goals for the eternally aware generation. Chapter 19: The Soul's Dilemma. Individual human beings faced the most profound psychological transformation in history as every person grappled with absolute certainty about life's eternal significance and their personal accountability. Personal relationships deepened as people recognized their connections might extend beyond death, yet anxiety increased as individuals faced cosmic scrutiny of their intimate choices and private thoughts. The burden of perfect accountability weighed heavily on human psychology. Some thrived with clear moral frameworks, while others crumbled under the pressure of eternal consequences for every decision. Free will concepts required re-examination as people questioned whether true choice existed when consequences were absolutely known. Philosophers debated whether certain knowledge eliminated moral freedom or enhanced its significance. Depression rates initially skyrocketed as people confronted their moral failures, then gradually decreased as individuals learned to navigate forgiveness, redemption, and spiritual growth with scientific precision. Marriage and family life transformed as couples united in shared eternal purpose, while simultaneously facing individual judgment for their roles as spouses and parents. Mental health professionals developed new therapeutic approaches for afterlife anxiety disorder as millions struggled to cope with cosmic accountability. Support groups formed for people overwhelmed by eternal responsibility. Personal testimonies emerged from individuals who claimed to have glimpsed their afterlife destination through near-death experiences, providing both hope and terror as people recognized the reality of eternal consequences for their daily choices. Chapter 20: The Choice That Awaits. As our journey concludes, we stand at the threshold of the ultimate question that would face every human being in a world where heaven and hell are proven real. How would you live if you knew with absolute certainty that your eternal destination depended on your choices? The final scientific expedition attempted to physically enter the documented heavenly realm, but mysterious beings emerged with a warning that shook the foundations of human understanding. Knowledge of eternity, they declared, was never meant to be certain for those still choosing their path. Evidence began mounting that the discovery itself might be part of a larger cosmic plan. Ancient prophecies from multiple religions spoke of end times when heaven and earth would be revealed. Scientists wondered if their breakthrough was fulfilling ancient predictions about final judgment. Strange phenomena suggested the boundary between dimensions was thinning. People worldwide reported direct encounters with beings from afterlife realms, Some brought messages of hope, while others carried warnings about humanity's response to eternal truth. The most disturbing discovery came when researchers realized that absolute knowledge of afterlife consequences might itself be the ultimate test of human character. Would people choose goodness from love or merely from fear of punishment? Was faith more valuable than certainty? As governments struggled to manage the social transformation and religious leaders worked to guide spiritual preparation, a new question emerged that no one had anticipated. What if the proof of heaven and hell was designed to reveal not just where souls would go after death, but what humanity would become when faced with absolute truth? The story ends as scientists detect massive dimensional activity, suggesting something unprecedented is approaching. The proven existence of eternal realms was apparently only the beginning of humanity's encounter with cosmic reality. Your choice awaits. In a world where every action echoes through eternity, where every thought is weighed on cosmic scales, where every relationship carries infinite consequence, what would you choose? And perhaps more importantly, what are you choosing right now, in this moment, as you consider the possibility that everything we've explored might be more real than you ever dared to believe? The question that remains is not whether heaven and hell exist, but whether you're prepared for the possibility that they do.